Houses and Homes, I'm going to clear up the most common misconception when looking for a horse property or property with land. HOA. So many people will ask or have the common misconception that they want a property without an HOA. So we find that property. Does this mean you can do what you want on the property or within the subdivision or the tract of land? The answer is no, and here's why. In a moment, I'm going to break down the definitions between an HOA, restrictive covenants, and deed restrictions. But when you are looking for a horse property, you want to make sure you are working with someone that understands the difference. And this difference can make a huge impact on how you can run your farm and actually build the horse property of your dreams. A homeowners association, or HOA, is a legal entity created to manage and maintain common areas and amenities within a community, neighborhood, subdivision, typically called HOA. They reinforce rules, regulations, and they'll even outline the governing documents such as bylaws, covenants, and those restrictions. On the other hand, restrictive covenants are legal agreements that are recorded in the actual deed of the property and place limitations on how the property can be used. These restrictions may include rules regarding architectural design of the home, outbuilding, landscaping, maintenance requirements, and other aspects of the actual property ownership. While HOAs are often the ones that enforce the restrictive covenants are the specific rules and regulations that apply to individual properties. Let's take it one step further, because I have a lot of clients that will come and ask for properties without HOA, and they talk about deed restrictions or restrictive covenants. And sometimes restrictive covenants and deed restrictions people will use interchangeably, but there's a subtle difference that's really important, especially for horse properties or land when you're wanting to maybe run a business or build on the land. So the subtle difference, restrictive covenants, like we talked about, are written into the deed, or they're in the deed, and they place limitations on how a property can be maintained or used. Deed restrictions are written by the seller, or added to the deed by the seller or developer, and they are also told how the property can be used. But these restrictions are binding on all subsequent owners. So in summary, restrictive covenants are a type of deed restriction that places limitations on how a property can be used, while deed restrictions refer to any limitations or conditions written into the actual deed of a property. For a property, you need to pay attention to all three to make certain that you can do what you want on your property. A little hint or tidbit that you can kind of go by. If it's a subdivision, developers typically will write in restrictive covenants. And in that subdivision, if the neighborhood decides to have an HOA, they will enforce. I always recommend to talk to an attorney, because if there's no HOA and there are restrictive covenants, who is actually governing those restrictive covenants? And that is something I would absolutely recommend to speak to an attorney about. Furthermore, in North Carolina, if you're looking at a big tract of land that was then subdivided or broken down and sold to, let's say it was family land and then sold to part of their family one tract and broken down to different parcels, typically there are not going to be restrictive covenants because there's not going to be a developer. So then you're going to want to look and refer to the deed restrictions to see, are there easements written in, or is there anything that the actual seller put into the deed restrictions that they don't want that tract of land to be used for. This all can be found and discovered when you find the right realtor, and I always recommend using an agent that is versed in land and navigating between those restrictive covenants, deed restrictions, and then kind of giving you the ins and outs of an HOA. Thank you for watching. Can't wait to see you next week.